Why do we love books about women that are falling apart? Books where the women are making awful choices, laying in bed for weeks on end, obsessing over a man who doesn't love them, or destroying themselves for no real reason at all. It feels like for decades, female protagonists were expected to be likable. They had to be kind, smart, morally upright. Now we have women who are messy, miserable, and sometimes even downright unlikable. But the trend has been that we cannot stop reading about them. But why? What do these books have to offer us? And what does it say about the way that we view sadness, femininity, and mental health? To understand this movement towards the female protagonists becoming the depressed girl, we have to go to one of the OG depressed girls in books, the Bell Jar. Now this book is problematic because Sylvia Plath shows a lot of racism, and while it's probably impossible to cancel her due to the fact that she is dead, that is something that you have to keep in mind when you're reading this book. Yes, it was back then when maybe you could be racist and get away with it. It was just the norm, but also she was of privilege. She was just racist to be racist. She was not necessarily a good person, and we can't cover that up and hide it because she was mentally ill. Now this came out in 1963, and this is arguably the first book to capture the idea of the disillusioned, mentally unwell young woman in a way that felt deeply personal, brutally honest, and unapologetic. The book follows Esther Greenwood, a talented young woman who spirals into depression and experiences a breakdown which puts her into the hospital. But what I think makes The Bell Jar so good and different from all of the other books that were coming out around this time with women who were maybe showing signs of mental illness is about how this story is told. In 1963, when this novel was published, women's literature still largely revolved around social realism, domestic struggles, and female protagonists either overcoming adversity or falling victim to it in a tragic but poetic way. Plath instead wrote something that was raw, cynical, and gave us access to a woman's thoughts in a way that felt very unfiltered. Esther is deeply alienated from the world around her, a world that really expects her to be excited about this promising future that she has. But instead, she just feels suffocation underneath all of this expectation and pressure. Everybody knows the fig tree analogy that comes from this book, and it is a widely renowned and very wonderful way of thinking, and it's a super popular passage about how life can branch off and you are basically choosing your own destiny. The fig tree analogy does a really good job of capturing the feeling of paralysis, the fear of choosing the wrong path, the wrong future. At the time of its release, The Bell Jar was a shocking book, seeing that it was also a semi-autobiography and mirrored a lot of Plath's own mental illnesses, and her eventual suicide 1 month after its publication only added to its dark legacy. This wasn't a book about redemption. This wasn't a book about recovery. The heroine never found true love. She never even found herself. Instead, it was a book about feeling lost, about feeling like the world around you doesn't make sense, and the really scary realization that maybe it never will. Yes, there were books before The Bell Jar that dealt with women's mental illness, like The Yellow Wallpaper, but they tend to frame the women as tragic victims of society, not as fully realized protagonists with internalized lives that are complex, bitter, and messy. Esther was not just suffering from depression. She was also sometimes incredibly cruel and cynical. And unlike some other stories about women's breakdowns, her story was not written as a tale of caution about defying social norms. For this reason, The Bell Jar has remained a very popular book for women who are seeing themselves in Esther's struggles. This novel set the stage for the unhinged woman genre that we know today. The literature that allows female protagonists to be depressed, self-destructive, and alienated without necessarily finding resolution. So this book, The Bell Jar, helped push forward the death of the likable woman in novels. Think about Jane Austen's female characters. Yes, they were all strong-willed, but they were ultimately good-hearted. Even characters who struggled, like Jo March or Elizabeth Bennet, always learned something in the end of the book. They were messy in ways that made them charming instead of ways that made them alienated. Meanwhile, the flip side, male characters, they were allowed to be complicated. Think Jay Gatsby, Patrick Bateman. They could spiral into self-destruction and we would still think that it was completely profound. But women were not allowed to do that. Not with the same depth. If a female character was messy, she either had to be punished by the narrative or redeemed by the end of the book. So these popular books now about the unhinged woman, they say, what if we just left her? What if we just let her be messy, awful? They're also brutally honest about mental health. This literary genre of unhinged women and depressed women don't fall into the same category of making depression meaningful. All of those old books, they tend to say if this female character has depression, there has to be a deep, tragic reason behind it. Abuse, loss, trauma, something that justifies this woman's sadness. But this new wave of literary unhinged women in books, they reject that almost entirely. Depression in the Bell Jar or My Year of Rest and Relaxation isn't cinematic. It's not even very poetic. It's numb, repetitive, exhausting. No neat little lesson wrapped up with a bow around it. There's no grand revelation, just the reality of being completely indifferent to life. And then even closer, starting in the 2000s, all of our books were about the girl boss era, where they showed women getting these incredible jobs and maybe not completely thriving, but they were hustling and productive and always working towards something. The books were basically that one Pinterest quote that was like, you have the same number of days as Beyonce, or you know what I'm talking about. Like, those books were telling us that we regular women are failing when we're choosing to not be hustling and spreading ourselves thin. And maybe we did buy into it at the time, but we quickly burned out of it. My Year of Rest and Relaxation was very much the anti-girl boss manifesto. The main character literally decides to just sleep for a year just to escape the pressure of doing things. And that resonated with a lot of women because we are tired. We don't want to optimize our routines and wake up at 5 a.m. and drink green juice and go to Pilates and then go to work and then still keep a household clean and take care of kids or be in unfulfilling relationships. So in total, we've gone from idolizing girl bosses to romanticizing the complete opposite. The messy woman, the disaster, the anti-hero. Think of the way the internet talks about Julia Fox and Anna Delvey. They're icons, but they're also train wrecks. And we love it, I love it. I want to see them succeed, but we also kind of want to see them fall apart. We want to resonate with them in a way that feels more personable than with other celebrities. And these books tap into that same kind of energy. They let us indulge in female failure, the kind of failure that is unpolished, unfiltered, and very human feeling. Now a deep dive into some books that match this unhinged woman trend. So we have The Bell Jar as our foundation. This is what all of these other books have built off of. They've pulled some sort of aspect from The Bell Jar and they've created their own book that resonates with them, with us still also. First, My Year of Rest and Relaxation. This is the aestheticization of isolation. Ottessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation takes the female alienation and removes almost everything that could sentimentalize it. Unlike The Bell Jar, where Esther is fighting to understand her place in the world, the unnamed narrator in My Year of Rest and Relaxation actively is rejecting the world in its entirety. She's beautiful, wealthy, and miserable. And because of this, she decides to drug herself into a year-long hibernation attempt, hoping that when she wakes up, she'll be a better person. This book is a good example of how modern unhinged women literature pushes the boundaries of what we find sympathetic. The narrator in My Year of Rest and Relaxation is very selfish. She's cruel to her best friend. She's disengaged from the world around her. And honestly, I didn't like this book for those exact reasons. But what makes this such a compelling read for the unhinged, depressed girl genre is that she embodies a very specific type of contemporary nihilism. The idea that the world is completely unbearable, maybe the best thing to do is opt out of it. This novel is one that blew up on TikTok, and I think this novel's popularity speaks to a deep exhaustion that women feel in their life. This constant pressure to be productive, to be likable, to be socially engaged. The narrator in My Year of Rest and Relaxation rejects all of it. In some ways, she's a very extreme, hardcore version of the quiet quitting theme that is growing in popularity, and readers may not approve of her. I didn't approve of her. I didn't even very much like her or reading the book, but I did resonate with her, and I think others found themselves also resonating with her. So while The Bell Jar grapples with loneliness and not fitting into the worlds of traditional womanhood, My Year of Rest and Relaxation suggests something even a little bit more disturbing. What if you fit into it perfectly? Rich, thin, blonde, or privileged, but that still makes you miserable. Acts of Desperation. This book really takes on the masochism of desire. Nolan completely strips away the aesthetic of depression and forces us into a deeply uncomfortable headspace of a woman who completely loses herself in a very obsessive, toxic relationship. The narrator in Acts of Desperation doesn't disengage with the world around her, unlike My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Instead, she throws herself at it, specifically at men, in a way that causes self-destruction. The protagonist in Acts of Desperation falls for a man who is cold and cruel and distant and emotionally unavailable, and she becomes consumed by this need to make him love her. Her desperation isn't glamorous. Instead, it's very pathetic. And more or less, that's exactly the point of this book. This novel doesn't really romanticize this kind of longing. It instead exposes it. The narrator's obsession with being loved is so visceral that at some point it becomes physically painful for the reader to continue to read. This book hits a nerve because it explores the brutal truth that many women are conditioned to believe that being loved is the ultimate validation, even if it requires losing themselves entirely in the process of achieving that love. Nolan forces us to ask whether our ideas of love are just self-destruction. Acts of Desperation also kind of touches on the topic of being aware of toxicity in your relationship and in yourself, makes it easier to escape that. The narrator knows what she's doing. She knows that this man doesn't love her. She knows that she's being pathetic, but she doesn't stop. And when you're reading this, you're forced to kind of sit with that discomfort, making it a really emotionally raw, but also a brutally aware book. Ripe. And this really touches on the weight of existential dread. Sarah Rose Etter's Ripe is really a book that is completely drenched in anxiety. Unlike Acts of Desperation, which focuses on romantic obsession, Ripe focuses on the feeling of being trapped in a soulless capitalist world. The protagonist, Cassie, works a high-stress job in Silicon Valley and is completely disconnected from herself instead of the world around her, like My Year of Rest and Relaxation. The only thing she truly feels is an actual black hole, which is a metaphor for the unending emptiness that she feels inside of herself. Cassie's black hole is such a striking visual metaphor because it externalizes something that is often just internal and something that many people can't articulate. This crushing, bottomless void of anxiety, depression, modern existence. She has everything that she's supposed to want, yet it feels meaningless and pointless. In a world that glorifies hustle culture, Ripe exposes the more emotional costs of chasing success. In this book, the job is high-paying but dehumanizing, and the main character clings to anything that makes her happy. A nice apartment, a boyfriend, food, friends, but none of it actually fills the void. Sarah Rose Etter leans into surrealism a little bit to make Cassie's depression feel almost supernatural. Black hole grows, shrinks, warps. In her doing this, the novel does a really good job of capturing the suffocating experience of being stuck in a life, in a job that you never really chose. These three books build on the foundation that the Bell Jar created. My Year of Rest and Relaxation rejects the idea of productivity and social engagement, turning depression into an act of defiance. Acts of Desperation explores the self-annihilation of obsessive love, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about what desire is. And Ripe takes modern capitalism and turns it into more of a horror story, making depression feel like this all-consuming force outside of human control. Each of these books resonates because they speak to a particular anxiety in contemporary life, making them essential reads for anybody that's interested in this unhinged woman genre. But is the romanticization of sadness a good thing? There's a very delicate balance between representation and romanticization. Literature has always explored suffering, tortured artist trope, brooding male protagonists. But when it comes to female characters, the framing often shifts. Part of the allure of these books is that they allow us to explore and experience a version of sadness that is, in a way, comforting. They create a space where readers can sit with these emotions that we're often told to push away and ignore. And it's also worth noting that there is some power in reclaiming our sadness. Historically, women's emotional expressions have been turned into medical issues. Depression was hysteria. Sadness was just being overly sensitive. These books take the narrative and flip it, allowing their female characters to be fully immersed in these emotions without seeking immediate resolution. But the danger to this romanticization of sadness, making depression an aesthetic, can blur the lines between healthy introspection and destructive thought patterns. I'm not a doctor, this is just thoughts. Take it all with a grain of salt. Potentially, a reader who is struggling with their mental health might see these characters as aspirational. For example, the protagonist in My Year of Rest and Relaxation thinks that sleeping for an entire year will cleanse her of her pain. But while this book has lots of dark humor and is very satirical, some readers may interpret it as a genuine how-to manual for self-isolation. This is where reader interpretation really becomes key to any sort of extreme literary genre. Are we engaging with these books critically, or are we internalizing their message without reflection? Now, we know that these books are a rejection of how women have been forced to be perceived in media, but these books can also be seen as a rejection of society's expectations and standards for women. It is seen time and time again that women in literature were expected to serve a purpose, most often as moral figures, love interests, and cautionary tales. But These books show us a little bit of what happens if we reject those roles. One of the most radical aspects of these books is their refusal to force female protagonists into an action. These women are not heroines on a journey of self-discovery. In fact, they're often resisting change completely. Take the book The New Me. Millie doesn't strive to fix herself, nor does she find fulfillment in relationships or work. She's stagnant, and the book does not punish her for this. This book does a great job of challenging the deeply ingrained idea that women have to always be striving towards success, striving towards love, striving towards self-improvement. Instead, this book and many others suggest that women should be allowed to simply exist, even if that existence is messy and unappealing. Another thing traditionally that literature has done to women is categorize them. The virgin, the mother, the seductress, the tragic beauty. These characters, these books all actively resist these categories. This book, Mona, for example, Mona is brilliant and deeply self-destructive, and her pain isn't neatly wrapped up by the end of the novel. Or The Bell Jar, where Esther should be thriving, but instead finds herself suffocating under society's expectations. All of these books say, what if women don't want to be likable? What if they don't want to be redeemed? What if their sadness isn't just a problem to be solved, but a state of being? In the end, it is all up to reader interpretation. Well, if you're interested in this genre, if you've read any of these books, or you're looking to get more into the genre, here are some book recommendations for you. We have the books that have been mentioned throughout this video: The Bell Jar, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, Acts of Desperation, Ripe, The New Me, and Mona. But some other ones that fall into this category that I haven't mentioned are Milk Fed. This is about a woman who's obsessed with food, control, and desire, and it tackles body image, Jewish identity, and the search for fulfillment. Luster. This is a novel about a young Black woman who is navigating an affair with a married couple, and it explores themes of race, power, and self-destruction. Nobody Is Ever Missing. A woman walks away from her life and disappears into New Zealand, and this has themes of grief, alienation, and self-reinvention. Exciting Times. This book follows a young Irish woman caught between two relationships and entering an existential crisis. And lastly, Self-Portrait with Boy. An artist takes a photograph of a boy's death and grapples with fame and morality. And this book deals a lot with ambition, guilt, and loneliness. So if you love this genre as much as I do, I hope you enjoy these recs, and let me know what you think about the literary, unhinged, depressed, sad girl genre, if that is one of the genres that you are pulled towards. Bye!